Hi everybody, welcome to Kayak Fishing Cornwall. In this video I'm going to try and explain how I choose where I'm going to fish based on the forecasts that are available and where I get the data from to make that decision. A little information goes a long way, so hopefully I can help explain it to anybody that's new to the hobby. As when I was new to the hobby, I kept on going out to try and launch and fish, and only to get there and find that I'd totally misinterpreted the forecasts and there was waves smashing everywhere, and I went home disappointed quite a lot of times. So I'm going to take you through the process, show you what apps and things I check, and then how I can relate that to what goes on the water, and then I'm going to shoot a video of the trip based on that information and that thought process. So for me, fishing is never far from my mind. I work a Monday to Friday job, so I'm pretty much limited to the weekends for fishing. So I'll keep an eye on the wind forecast throughout the course of the week in the build up to the weekend, because basically it's all about the wind forecast for me. If it's raining, you know, I've got a dry suit on, I can put a hat on. It's up to me whether or not I go out and get wet. But you know, if it's too windy, then it's off, isn't it? So I use an app called Wind Finder, which I've found really easy to understand, and in my experience, it's been really, really accurate as well. So I'll bring that up on the screen and show you through that.
This is Wind Finder, which is the app I use on my phone to check the wind. I'm quite often looking at this, looking towards the weekends. So as you can see, the wind as we go towards the weekend is twisting round to northeast, calming down a little bit, and by the time we get to Saturday we've got 11 knots there, east northeast. So anything along this section of coast is offshore and shouldn't be too bad. As we go through the day, it comes right down, turns around a bit. Yep, Sunday morning's nice as well, so there's a bit of choice there really on location and day.
So where I tend to fish is on the Lizard Peninsula or in Mounts Bay. So that's pretty good because it gives you lots of options. So if you've got the wind coming from the east, that makes the east side of the Lizard not very nice, but then on the west side of the Lizard, you know, you've got a good chance of being able to get out as long as it isn't really, really windy or there isn't any swell built up, you know, from previous days. And also from, you know, if you've got anything coming from the north, there's usually somewhere in Mounts Bay that you can probably fish as long as the wind's not crazy speeds. So yeah, there's quite a good bit of option in 20 minutes of driving for me. So I'm quite lucky down here where I am. So as a general rule of thumb, on the day I want to fish, I'll look for wind speeds below 10 knots. That does kind of depend a little bit on the geography and the wind direction. So if you are fishing somewhere with like high coast and the wind is offshore and you know you will get some shelter from that wind, then that 10 knot guideline goes up a little bit for me. I have fished in like 20 knot winds where I've been tight into the shore and the cliffs given me plenty of protection from that. So it's just a rough guideline. But if you're on the water with no sort of protection from the coast, then 10 knots is plenty really. The wind direction does also have a bearing on the conditions in relation to the tide. So if the wind is running in the opposite direction to the tide, then it will create some choppy conditions on the surface. And obviously the bigger the tide is, the more that chop will increase. That's a wind against tide situation. If the wind's going across the tide, it's not too bad. And if it's going with the tide, it will flatten that surface chop out. So it's worth bearing that in mind if you know the direction of the tide on the flood or the ebb. and think about how that's going to interact with the wind on that day. So after I've decided that the wind looks like it's going to be doable on the day, I'll look at the swell interval and the swell size on an app called Surfline. It's a free app. You can pay extra to get extra features, but for me, the free stuff is generally enough to work out whether it's going to be okay or not. This information for me has been the most difficult to interpret, the relationship between the swell interval, so the distance between the swells, or the time between each swell, and the height of the swells. And you have to kind of take it with a bit of a pinch of salt, because I don't think that it can really accurately take in the local geography and the underwater topography. So use that as a guide only, and then with experience of the place, you will sort of learn how that will translate onto that place. But it is a tricky one at times. So I'll have a look at Surfline and talk a little bit about that. I'll bring it up on the screen in a sec.
This is Surfline. This is the app on my phone I use to check the swell intervals and the size of the swell. It's pretty good, but you have to sort of factor in what's been happening and the geography a little bit. So we just had a look at Windfinder, and I was looking at somewhere along the south coast. So this is for Mullion here. We can see Saturday we've got a 10-second interval, which is pretty good, and we know the wind is offshore, so that we'll have shelter from the cliffs. And the swell heights are pretty minimal. With that interval, it should be pretty nice down there.
Generally speaking, the longer the swell interval, the better. You can have quite a large swell height, like 4 foot or something, but with a long swell interval of like 16 seconds, that will be a nice, slow, gentle swell, and it'll be perfectly fine to fish and safe and all the rest of it. But then on the other hand, you can have like a relatively small swell, like a foot or 2 foot, with a short interval of like 5 or 6 seconds, and that would just be horrendous to try and fish in a lot of the time. So generally, swell interval is more important than swell height. And also, if you're launching from like a beach or something, it's relevant to how the wave's going to be interacting on the beach. So if you've got a long interval, the waves might sort of roll bigger on the beach, but then you've got more time to sort yourself out between each one, as opposed to if they're close together and breaking on the shore quickly, then it might be difficult to get yourself in and sorted out and, heading into them or whatever, nice and safely. You will find that swells interact with whatever's underneath the water. So if the reef shallows up a bit, then the swell's likely to pick up in that local area. And there's an example in the video later on where this actually happens. So you need to sort of keep your eyes peeled for areas where that might be happening. Sometimes they'll pick up enough to roll. And as the tide gets higher or lower, that might be emphasized depending on the height of the tide. So yeah, it's a tricky one. It's nearly caught me out a couple of times. And also particularly at the Lizard, I noticed it, the forecast and the swell and all forecast look pretty good, but then the reef around there is so, I don't know, well, it's just such that when the swell interacted with it, when I was down there with Kieran, that it really did pick up in certain areas because of the reef underneath, and made those areas unfishable for us on that particular day. So with the wind forecasts and the swell forecasts, that can give you like a really good starting point for basing your decision on where you're going to go and fish. What I tend to do as well is I'll look at webcams closest to the point where I'm thinking of fishing and compare that to what the current data is saying on Surfline for swell and interval. And then it will give you a good idea of what to expect in those sorts of conditions. So I typically use one at Marazion. There's one that looks over St Michael's Mount. There's one at Mullion, which I use a lot. And there was one at Kayak, which I used to use a lot, but that seems to be offline at the moment. And there's Penzance as well. So they give you a really good idea of what to expect. And also, like, if you know that the conditions are going to be better on the day that you're going, it also gives you the chance to look and think, well, that isn't great, but then I know that the forecast is going to be better than that, so, or worse than that. So it is a really valuable tool to use is the local webcams, if you can get them.
So this is the webcam on the Mullion Cove Hotel and Spa. I use this one regularly to check the conditions out. And if you look here at the right-hand side of the island, you can get a good indication of how much swell there is and by how it breaks onto these rocks here.
So at this point then, I've got my information from the apps and webcams, and I'll then have a look at the tide times and the tide sizes, because that can influence where my choice of place to fish is. So places like the Manacles and over Senon Way, where the tides can run really, really fast. On big tides, the tides, or the currents rather, run really fast through like the reefs, through the gullies in the reefs, and when the reefs shallow up, the water gets pushed over them really quickly, and it can be unpredictable and potentially dangerous. If you're trying to paddle against a 3-knot tide, you know, you're not going to go very far very fast, and you'll tire quickly. So it can rule, you know, on a big tide, it can rule certain areas out for me. I'll have to take that into consideration and choose where to fish based around that, really, as well. And then so that'll narrow down your areas a little bit again, and then I'll look at the ground available in those areas to fish, and I'll then decide what sort of fishing I want to do, whether I want to anchor up or, you know, spin with the lures or fish for squid or something. That also depends on the season and what's likely to be in the area. But I mean, for me, it nearly always ends up with, I'll just take the lure rod, and yeah, because I just love the lure fishing. That's the way I go.
This website, tidetimes.org, for the look at the tide times. We can see here at Lizard Point, which is it's not far from Mullion Cove, we've got let's get to Saturday. We've got a high at just gone, well, 12:30, and low at 6:20 in the morning. 4.21 metres high is not very big, so we'll have to just think about what that means for the fishing on the day. But as long as I avoid slack water, then yeah, that's pretty much what I aim to do, just avoid slack water. I don't mind if it's flooding or ebbing when I fish. So fast forward to Friday, the day before I want to fish, and I'm going to just have one more look at the wind finder, and you can see here that it's as we move through towards Saturday, the wind's still coming from the east and slackening off, then spinning around to come from the sort of north-northeast at a nice 6 knots, which means it should be pretty flat, should be nice. As we move further through the morning, you can see that by lunchtime it's swung right round to the northeast and is doing a 13 knot, which will make it pretty choppy. So Surfline's got a 10-second interval at Mullion, Paranooth Nose 8 seconds, and Port Thalstock is 5 seconds, which would probably be pretty nasty, pretty close chop. Good morning, welcome to Kayak Fishing Cornwall. I'm at Mullion today. I'm joined by Kieran of Cornish Fishing Tales.
There he is. Check out his channel. Kieran likes to shore fish, but I've tempted him out with the promise of some pollock today on the kayak. So I've got a promise to keep. I've done a bit of a video about how I decide where to fish and when. So hopefully this video will tie in with that. We'll see. We are going to just troll some lures, look for some pollock, look for some bass, and see how we get on. So yeah, I'll chuck some lures out behind me and bring you back when something happens. Right, we've trolled out. Haven't really got anything. Well, I had a knock. So we're just going to have a couple of casts at the back of the island and see if there's anything here. So, conditions wise, yeah, it's nice out here. There's a really small, close ripple on the water, not enough to make any difference. You know, it's really nice actually, but the wind is practically non-existent, which is what wind finder said it was going to be. So it should be nice up until about 10 o'clock, and then it's picking up to quite a stiff breeze between 10 and 1. So we'll see how that pans out. Well, that's what the forecasters said anyway. So there's a peak in the reef in front of me between me and the island. I've got my light spinning setup on, which is an Achios Spyro 3000, 20-pound braid, 20-pound leader, Penrath spin 10 to 40. I'm just going to chuck this at that lump for a little bit, just see if we get any interest. If there's no interest, I will change my lure out to the white Savage Gear sandal, have a couple of chucks with that, and again, if there's no interest, I think I'll move on. Hardly moving at the moment. So I've brought, just to change it up a little bit, I've brought a slow jigging setup out. So I might do a bit of slow jigging. Right, I'm going to have a crack with the white Savage Gear sand eel and restart my fish finder because that's playing up again for some reason. Couple of casts with this and then move on if there's nothing happening. Right, no joy casting over those peaks there near the island, but we're early in the tide, and it's a small tide, so there's not much tide running. Might nip out to a bit deeper reef and then fish that for a bit, and then come back in here later in the tide. Hopefully, the tide will be pushing a bit more, and there might be some action. Yeah, I'll bring you back when we get where we're going. Well, I'm going to try the far side of the reef because there's not much happening over this side. Yeah, so I might as well try it. It's beautiful here though. The water's glassy, look. Tiny little gentle swell. No wind, glassy. It's not making for great fishing, but just being out on the water is lovely. We'll have another half an hour on the reef and then go look for some bass. I'm still blanking. Kieran's had a couple of mackerel, a pollock. He lost a good fish. Yeah, so I'm being outdone by Kieran again down here on my own turf. That's all right. He's driven a long way to be with me today, and I'm glad he's having a few fish. It is stunning out here today. Right, I'm going to have a couple of casts with this fish, crazy eel, and if I don't get any joy, I'm going to go and cast around looking for a bass. Well, so far I'm blanking. We've been out here, well, nearly 2 hours. Dire. Kieran's had a few. It was like that the last time I was out here. They were absolutely dead on the reef. Hopefully I can find a bass safe and trip. Just gonna have a go with the SG sand eel over the same area. We're approaching, well, 10 o'clock, so according to Windfinder, the wind's going to change now and pick up strength from the sort of west-northwest, which is that away. It should, well, one good thing would be that it'll put some speed on the drift, because that's been a problem so far, only drifting at 0.2 knots or whatever. Not very helpful. I'm just going to put myself back over towards that, make sure I get that cast right over that peak. Right, no joy on this side either, so I'm going to troll back around the corner, see if there's anything there. I did just see a few birds hanging about near there, so it's definitely worth a look. Then we'll go back inside and see if we can, find a spot with a bass in it. But so far I'm on a blank. I need to catch something. I'm not coming to mullying and blanking. That's just not allowed. Right. My hat camera isn't working, unfortunately, but I'll try and get it on my other camera. I've just come to a point which I was thinking might hold some fish, because there's a little feature under the water, like a ridge, and it looked like bubbles on the surface, but as I went through it, it's not bubbles on the surface, it's jellyfish, like a huge, I don't know what we call it, swarm of jellyfish. So this feature under the water must be, and the currents must be sort of funneling these jellyfish to this place. I'll see if I can get some, see if I can get it on my other camera, show you how many there is here. But if the currents and the feature are funneling jellyfish to this point, my reckoning is there's every chance it's funneling food here. So once I've finished marvelling at that jellyfish has got some fishing line, once I've finished marvelling at just how many of these there is, I'll have a few casts about. Right, we're still looking for them bass. So it's now 11 o'clock and I can feel the wind has picked up and changed direction, and you can see a sort of, it's only a little bit of wind blown agitation on the surface, it's no problem. But just to show that app was spot on, absolutely spot on with what it predicted. I'm actually seeing some what looks like fish under me here, so I'm hopeful I can shake this blank. Right now the wind's picked up, we've got a bit of drift. I'm tempted to go and back out to the reef, drift the reef once or twice. At least we can cover some ground now. Yeah, I think I'll have one or two more casts here and then I might nip back out there for a drift. See if I can get a pollock. Yeah, the wind now is certainly starting to pick up from that direction, and put a bit of a, well, really close sort of chop on the water. It's not a problem yet. But I would imagine we know. Oh my god, a bite! Ah, that's the first bite I've had in. Well, I think I've had one until now, so 3 hours. So I'm going to have to go for a cast back there again. Got all excited then. Thought I was going to lose. Well, that's a fish. Ah, it is a fish. Not only is it a fish, it's a bloody decent fish. That's a good fish. I need to make sure I'm recording. Yes, I am, because this is a good fish. At last. Need to land this one. Otherwise, it's a blank. This is a good fish. Here he comes. That looks like a beast, actually. Yeah, that is a beast. Yeah, lovely. Wow. Christ. That ain't far off double. Whip. That ain't far off double figures, I wouldn't have thought. It's been a long time since I've had a double figure pollock. Ooh. Yeah, not a double, but not far off. That's got to be 7 or 8 pounds. Yeah, I know, I need a bigger net. Oh, Jesus. I've brought my scales. You know, I think I might weigh that. That's a hell of a fish. That is a beauty. God, now, you know what? That isn't going to be far off a double. That's bloody massive. Brilliant. I think I'll get a picture of this one, and I think this one might be coming home. Let's get some whacking great fillets out of that. Come on, let's have you up, show you. Yeah, that's a stonking fish. Look at that. I will give that away once I've dispatched him. Get a good view of that. It's a beauty. Right, just weighed that pollock. It was £9.9, so not a million miles off a double. As you can see, the chopper's picked up quite a bit now, so we're probably going to we're approaching high tide. We're probably just going to run this drift out and then head back to shore. I'm over the moon. I've got a blank saver. Kieran's had a few fish. He's got something for lunch. You got a couple of mackerel for lunch, Kieran, haven't you? Huh? You got a couple of mackerel for lunch? Oh, yeah, for lunch. Right, we're at pretty much high water now, 12:30, so the wind has really picked up, as you can probably see. They're starting to crest a little bit here. I think this is pretty much time to pack it in. I've had a couple of decent fish. Kieran's had a few fish. We'll just troll back to shore, I reckon, and call it a day. Okay, so if you made it this far, thanks for sticking with me. As you can see, I tried a lot of different areas of reef, a lot of different lures to try and find the fish. It was very slow going, but yeah, nice fish for my efforts. The forecast panned out exactly as predicted, which was handy, and just about here you can see that phenomenon I was talking about, where the swell hits a shallower bit of reef and then really picks up in a local, like a specific area. And yeah, there's a couple of peaks under where I'm going through now, which threw that bit of swell up and made it quite interesting. By this time the wind had built as predicted to 13 miles an hour from that direction, and put the chop on the water that I was expecting, really, as it was against the tide, so it was definitely time to head in at this point. Right, that was the last drift. We're headed in now. The forecast was bang on. The wind has picked up. It's put some pretty nasty chop on the water, so the waves are starting to crest here and there, so we're going to head in whilst the going's good, take what we've got and head in. Yeah, so oh, I'm marking some fish here. Keep an eye on these rods. Would be nice to pick a bass up before the day was out, but we're yeah, it's a couple of 100 meters before we're back to shore. Anyway, I'll release the video about how I decided here and decided to fish here rather, and my thought process on the conditions and the forecasts and how I go about planning a trip. If that kind of thing's useful or interesting to you, then please consider subscribing. It doesn't cost anything, and you'll be notified whenever I release a video. I try to get out as often as I can, and yeah, talk a little bit about where I'm going, what I'm doing, my approaches. Thanks for joining me today, and thanks to Kieran from Cornish Fishing Jails for driving all the way down here to join me. Yeah, nice to have some company. That's all then, unless something happens between here and the shore. So I'll see you next time.